I always say you are the goalie of your show and your audience is behind you. So when somebody comes in and they have, they're using a blue Yeti that's, 15 feet from their mouth and it sounds like they're in a fishbowl in a bathroom, it's your brand that takes the hit. And so when you come in, I just, nope, not on my show. Sorry. Nope, nope, nope. I don't listen to really, really popular shows where the audio is horrible. And I'm not so much of an audio snob until I started driving around. Usually I'm in my office when I'm listening to stuff. And when you add the sound of a freeway and everything else, if your volumes are all over the place or somebody has a lot of built-in echo, you can't hear them. And whose brand takes the hit? Yours. And people go, well, I get it, Dave, but they're my guest. I go, well, your guest came into your living room and took a bunch of poo-poo right there right on the carpet. They went poo-poo. I'm like, what if somebody did that? You would go, yeah, I'm sorry. You need to leave now.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to a brand new episode of the None of Your Business podcast. Sean and Lacey here with you, just as we are each and every week. I'm super excited about today's episode. It's going to be a piece of cake, just all things that I'm excited to learn more about. But really, I'm super excited for all of our listeners. And our show is one where our guests are free to disagree. Mm-hmm. They're able to take us to school. Today we're going to school.
We are going to school.
But I am a big believer that all of our listeners can benefit greatly if they understood better the topic of podcasting. And so we'll find out, are we on the right track? And we have an expert that'll help us to get on the right track and get started for those of you that are stuck.
But this is like our Inception episode. It's a podcast about podcasts from a podcaster, and we're interviewing him about podcasts.
Whoa. All right, let's do it. Today's guests from schoolofpodcasting.com. Make sure you check them out early and often. Dave Jackson, thanks for joining us on the None of Your Business podcast.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I go through that a lot. People are like, what's your podcast about? And I go, podcasting. And they're like, you can see them go, wait, it's a podcast about It's like, wait, you carry the one. Yeah. It's everything's super meta.
I love it.
We begin every one of our podcasts with this very same question. Excited to hear some of your contributions in answering this, and especially when it comes to podcasting. It's something that people might look at your body of work in the field of podcasting and be like, well, that's easy for Dave because he probably worked for Joe Rogan. Probably Joe Rogan shouted him out. Patrick Bet David, all the big podcasts. Everybody was like, yeah. Dave is the man. And so I wish it would be that easy for me, right. But I can't even figure out what microphone to use. Nobody's helping me. I wish I was Dave Jackson. And what we always come to find out is that, our guests, they've been on quite the journey themselves. And it's not as easy as it appears when you make it to where you're making the rounds on podcasts, where you are now the expert. Would love to learn a little bit about your creation story. How do you become such a renowned expert in the field of podcasting?
Number one, you don't quit. That's like step one, don't quit. But it really boils down to every job I had growing up, I eventually ended up either in the training department or the marketing department, or today I'm in both. I got a job because of my podcast. I'm teaching people via tech support, and I'm also in the marketing department. I do a lot of stuff. So it really boils down to that. I was a teacher in the corporate world for years. I taught a lot of Microsoft Office. The gray hair will let you know that I used to teach people how to surf the internet because they didn't know what it was, and how to send email. Yes, there were actually times. This was before Google. And if you say that to somebody like around 25 years old, their head will explode when you say before Google. But I've been doing it a long time, and I've seen a lot of things come and go right by me. Like to date myself, I had missed the MySpace boat, and a friend of mine came back and said, hey, you know how you missed the MySpace boat? And I go, yeah. And he goes, I've just seen the next big thing. And I go, great, what is it? And he goes, podcasting. And I Googled it, and there was 1.5 pages. And I'm like, wait, how do you spell this? I think I broke the internet. And there was 1.5 pages of results. This is back in 2005. And so at the time, they were saying podcasting is going to be the next big thing, and membership sites are the next big thing. And I've just seen so many things kind of just go right by me. And I go, oh, I should have jumped on that. That I was like, I'm not going to let this one go by. I'm going to go ahead and give this a shot. So the School of Podcasting was born, and the first 3 years were just brutal because this was when I started. There was no iTunes yet; it wasn't in iTunes, and so I'd be asking people, "Hey, do you listen to podcasts?" And they're like, "Oh, do you need an iPod for that?" And I'm like, "No, just kind of the internet and speakers." And so it was a slow, very slow growth at the beginning, and I didn't know anything about marketing. My background was a teacher, so I started off. I way undervalued myself so nobody would order anything from me because I was charging $5. $5 a month. If I could get 500 people to give me $5 a month, that'd be great. And yeah, so all sorts of fun kind of learning lessons that you do along the way. But that's how I kind of fell into it. And then where I am now, I actually got a job from because the fun thing with teaching is about every 7 years they hire a bunch of sales guys who can't sell training. So rather than downsize sales guys, they downsized the training department. And so when I was let go, I was like, I'd love to get a job in podcasting. And so I had been a happy Libsyn customer for about 10 years at that point. And I called the vice president, and 20 minutes later, I was talking to the president doing a phone interview, and I've been there about 7 or 8 years now. So the podcast gave me a resume. It helped me build the relationships that I needed to end up with a cool job. And the biggest reason, I mean, I love Libsyn, but I also love health benefits. And then
Yeah.
the school of podcasting became a super serious side hustle.
How exciting. So you said something really interesting. You said that in 2005, when you Googled podcasts, right, and it was a page and a half, you didn't want it to pass you by and it was going to be the next big thing. But what's really interesting, I mean, here we are in 2023, and I feel like people are still saying podcasts are going to be the next big thing. Like you can still get on the podcast train because it's going to be even much bigger than it is now. How do you feel about that statement, and do you believe that's true?
Yeah, I do believe it's true because a lot of people come into podcasting with like extremely unrealistic expectations. And that's why many podcasters make it to 7 episodes and they're like, I'm not on Jimmy Fallon yet. Forget this. And they're out. I'm not making $1 million. And so they quit. So, yeah, there's plenty of room. There are about 4 million podcasts at this point, but only about 300,000 of those are actually regularly producing content. And yes, there's always that, typical kind of, seven, like they started off, we're going to make 7 episodes about this topic. Okay, great. They're not making any new content, but there are plenty of those that are supposed to be making new content. And again, they've just kind of sputtered out for whatever reason. So a lot of people hear 4 million podcasts. That's, oh, there's so much competition. I'm like, not really. And if you look at how many new YouTube channels are created every day, and there's much more competition for YouTube than there is podcasting, and yet nobody hesitates to make a YouTube channel. So, and if you compare that to blogs, for every one podcast, there are 2,000 blogs. And
Wow.
so I'm from Akron, Ohio. So we root for the Cleveland team and the Cleveland football stadium, which we affectionately refer to as the Factory of Sadness. You know, if you had a full stadium and said, "Hey, we need all the podcasters to come down to the field," there'd be 37 people. So it's
Right.
much easier to be found as a podcaster than a blogger and probably a
Wow.
YouTuber.
Interesting.
Wow, that's fascinating stuff.
Exciting.
All right, so I want to start this story arc here. Let's begin then for everybody that's listening. My thesis is that almost everybody that listens to the show, service-based entrepreneurs, can benefit by having a podcast. However, you made some interesting points. Like, what does that mean exactly? Benefit? Like, am I saying that they're going to get on Jimmy Kimmel? Are we saying that if they would make a podcast, they'll, have all of these corporate sponsors and they're going to be paid millions of dollars? So let's first begin with why should somebody who listens to this program, service-based entrepreneurs, why should they consider jumping into this podcast game? I mean, the odds, the numbers sound great, but at the same time, I could make the argument, listen, the reason why there's so few is
'Cause it may
because it's
not be worth
hard
it, or it's
or it's not
hard.
Right.
worth it, or
Yeah.
right. So tell me why we should even consider jumping into this.
Sure. Number one, I always say record a couple episodes because you're probably going to throw those away. Those are called rough drafts if you were an author, and figure out how much time it takes to make one. And then say, oh, that took me, 14 hours to make one episode. Do I have 14 hours a week? No. Well, then you're not doing a weekly show. Maybe you're doing every other week, or maybe you should do a 10-minute show. Yes, you could do that. So whatever schedule you pick, when you hit that, you are now seen as reliable. I have people say things like, Dave, you're with me every Monday on the way to the feed store, or Dave, you're with me every Monday when I'm taking my kids to school, because I haven't missed a Monday in 18 years. So you are seen as reliable. Then anytime you can make a point with a personal story. So I talk about podcasting. And when Muhammad Ali died, he was like a hero of mine. He was so much more than a boxer. And I was really bummed. And I was like, yeah, but my show's about podcasting. So I was like, all right, here are, whatever, 8 things you can learn from Muhammad Ali that every podcaster should do. And number one, really, really talented. Number two, totally unique. Number three, always promoting, going on and on. And so my audience, some of them reached out and said, hey, he was my champ too, Dave. And now I've got a conversation going with my audience. So anytime you can share something, they kind of get to know you. And then I'm assuming your show is good, because otherwise they wouldn't be listening. So you're good, so they trust you. So there's the whole know, like, and trust. So that's why every entrepreneur should do that. But the other thing it does, people always ask me, should I do a solo show or should I do an interview show? And I'm like, why are you limiting it to one or the other? Because when you do a solo show, you grow your influence. When you do an interview, then you grow your network. And I've talked to all sorts of people that I have no business talking to. My very first podcast was for musicians. That's one of my hobbies. And I was talking to all these people that I grew up listening to, that played with Ozzy Osbourne and all these other things. And so you're going to grow your network. And it really boils down to those relationships lead to opportunities. The opportunities lead to more relationships. And along the lines, some of those opportunities are going to pay. So that's the handy part. And then the other one is when you have that know, like, and trust factor, when you say, hey, I've got a new book, I do coaching, I have a course, whatever it is, then that really is so much more valuable than any kind of ad spend that somebody's going to, throw your way.
I mean, absolutely. I think that, those are two very important things that entrepreneurs are continuously looking for: how to build more credibility, how to get more people to like them, how to get more people to trust them. And then on top of that, how to create relationships that can eventually pay off, or, like a I can help you, you can help me type of thing. And I know from personal experience, Sean and I have really enjoyed doing our podcast because we're able to meet wonderful people like you. And oftentimes those relationships go much further than the one episode. So I do think that's a great point for entrepreneurs. So now I'm an entrepreneur and I'm like, I love this. I love this idea. I love these two things. I can get behind it. Okay, Dave, but now what? Like, what's the formula? What do I talk about? How do I get started?
Yeah, well, number one, you get started by buying this microphone. This is an ATR Audio Technica ATR 2100. I also like the Samson Q2U. It's like $100 if you don't want to put out, $200 for a Shure, or a $400 mic for the SM7B, better known as the Joe Rogan mic. Because if I get his microphone, I'll be just as successful as Joe is.
Of
That makes a lot of
course.
sense. But the hard part is you have to really figure out, who is this for? And so you might say, here's an example. Let's say I'm going to do a show for widows. And you're like, ooh, you really niche down because you just cut out all the guys. And you're like, yeah, but there's a big difference between the widow that's 38 and lost her husband in a car crash versus Mildred, who lost Harold at age 97 or something like that.
Right.
So that when you come out with an episode and it's like, hey, girls, we're going to talk about getting, back out there, I'm not sure Mildred's going to be down for that. So the
Right.
more you really know, then you can really tailor your content. And then you have to know, why am I doing this? So if the goal is to position myself as an expert, then maybe I want to do a 15, 20-minute episode where I talk about one subject and I do a deep dive and look at me and how much I know. But you can also, if the goal is to just keep your brand out there, it's funny, I can't remember the name of the show, but I do remember that it was brought to you by the Association of Christian Athletes, because they said that at the end of every episode, and it was a 5-day a week, maybe 5-minute podcast. It was something to do with health, and it'd be like, hey, do carrots are good for you, blah, 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 eyesight, blah, 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 Association of Christian Athletes. So it worked. It kept their brand in front of me. And so once you know why you're doing it and who it's for, this is the hard part, because here's my why, here's my what. It's where they overlap defines the what. Because if I just talk about what they want to talk about, well, we'll talk about cat videos and French toast recipes. That's not going to get me to what I want. And if I just talk about what I want, that's called an infomercial. And nobody's setting the TiVo or the DVR to tape the next ShamWow commercial. It's got to be a little bit of both. It's got to be entertaining. It's got to be educational. If you're trying to educate them about your particular niche, whatever you're doing, and that's the what. And the part that most people skip is, if they even do that, then you have to find somebody who will tell you the truth. And you need people like this. I had someone, and it's embarrassing, but it happened about 2 months ago. A member of the School of Podcasting said, "Hey, Dave, I love you." And I'm like, "Yes." That's a weird way to start a sentence. She's like, "Do you know you have a typo in your podcast?" And I go, "What episode?" She goes, No, it's in the name of the podcast." I go, "The School of Podcasting? No way." And there it was: plan, launch, grow, and monetize. I had left out an I in monetize. And you need somebody who will say, "I liked this part. I thought this was good. You lost me in the middle of this. And, your sound is okay." You need somebody who's going to do that, because people will start like, "Okay, I've got it up, I'm ready to go." And one strategy for growth is to buy ads. Well, you don't want to buy ads on a piece of marketing material, which is really what your podcast is, if it's not resonating with the audience. So a lot of people skip that step. You have to make sure it's doing what it's supposed to do. And then once you have proof of concept, then you pour gas on it.
All right, next up. That was great. What about the tech? I run into all the people. So you taught us the mic.
Yep.
Fairly
Mhm.
easy. You can go on Amazon and get my mic. But then this is where people just get so bogged down,
This
because
might take them
it's
14 hours.
well, it's daunting if you
Yeah.
don't know. And then then you get paralyzed, because
Yep.
what platforms do I need to be putting this on? I get scared, because what categories, descriptions, I want to get it right. I don't know what to do. So you know what? It's easier just not to do anything. And listen, a lot of people that could benefit from a podcast, yes, we can get the mic, but then we don't know the rest of it. And I think that is a major hangup. And one of your superpowers, Dave, is that you somehow have this ability to explain to us the tech side in a way that we understand. Isn't that true?
Yeah, the first thing is, it doesn't have to be perfect. We want it to be perfect, and when
Yeah.
you aim at perfect and you miss, you land on really, really good. And so many times we think, "Oh, I don't know anything about this," and I go, "Okay, um, here's Audacity. It's a free software. Big giant red button in the middle of it." I go, "Guess which one's the record button?" People go, "Well, duh, the big red one." I'm like, there you go. And then I go, "Have you ever attached a Word document to an email or uploaded a picture to Facebook?" And they go, "Yeah." And I'm like, "Okay, well then you can upload an MP3 file to your media host." And they're like, "Yeah, but all that audio stuff." I'm like, "Okay. Ever been in the car and your jam comes on?" You're like, "Yes." And you crank up the volume. And then 2 minutes later, the phone rings. And so what do? You turn down the radio so you can hear your phone. And then I go, "Aha. So you know how to mix audio." So I'm not saying there's no like learning curve, but it's not as hard as you think. I have clients that they get done and I'm like, "Okay, you're in Apple and Spotify and Google and all those other fun filled places. Like, now just make episodes." And they're like, "Yeah, but what's next?" And I go, "That's it." And they go, "No, seriously, like, what's next?" I go, "Make episodes and tell everybody about it." It's really, I think we make it harder than it has to be. And you asked about what platforms. There are a ton. I mean, obviously I work for Libsyn, so I love Libsyn, but there's also Captivate and Buzzsprout and Blueberry. There are many of those. I'm not a big fan of when a brand new one comes on the scene, because again, we've kind of mentioned how podcasting is the hot thing. So Kajabi is a great marketing tool, but they added a podcast thing, and it's kind of like, not my favorite. Just stay in your lane, maybe a little bit. But in terms of where should I be, it's October as we record this, And it's like, let's say you've got your little junior next to you, and they got their Spider-Man suit on, and you take them out and you explain to them, hey, on the street, every house that has their light on has candy, and they've got their pumpkin ready to fill it up. You don't see that kid go, well, all right, maybe this one. Yeah, that one. Nope. Skip, skip, skip. No, that kid doesn't do that. He wants candy. And so as podcasters, we want downloads. So it blows my mind that it doesn't matter who your media host is. They make it really easy to list your show on Apple and Google and Spotify and Amazon and iHeart and all the other ones. And people will go, I'm in Apple and Spotify. I had 6,000 downloads last year from things not named Apple and Spotify. So, Deezer is the Pandora of Europe. There is obviously iHeart and Amazon. Those are the two that always make me scratch my head. Like, why wouldn't you want to be in Amazon? But it takes, we're talking maybe 10 minutes to list your show in all of those things. And so that's the tech part isn't really that hard. It really boils down to more planning. I think these have been outlawed, but back in the day when I was on a playground, there were these things called teeter totters, and you would sit on one side. And so more planning equals less editing. But if you start off an interview or something and you just start winging it, well, okay, less plan. You're going to do a lot more editing. And so you keep your sanity when you have a little more planning, because there's going to be less editing. And that editing then is based on what? Knowing exactly who your audience is for.
When he said teeter totter, I thought he was going to say brass knuckles.
Those have always been outlawed, though.
Yeah, I think
Those were
so.
never legal.
Those do
I'm
not
gonna
take
go with
brass
no.
knuckles on the playground.
Yeah.
Brass knuckles on the playground, a super
Where did you
no-no.
grow up, man?
That's right, I know. Jeez Louise. Well, on that note, knowing that we're not knocking anybody out on the playground, I have the next question. All right, so I kind of want to know, is there any like secret sauce or any commonality that you have seen watching a lot of podcasts that become successful? Obviously, knowing your ideal client, your target market, and understanding what kind of message that they want to hear is definitely going to help get downloads, right? But like, is there anything else that you've noticed about the hosts in particular that allow a podcast to take off?
Yeah, there are a couple of things, especially when it comes to making money with your podcast. If you're helping people solve a problem, that always works. But the other thing is, I hear people go, well, podcasts, like right now, we're just having a conversation, right? And that's true. Podcasts are a conversation, asterisks, with the boring parts removed. And so if I'm doing an interview, the first thing I listen for is, okay, here's my question. And many times, if it's a follow-up question, I am horrible. And I will open my mouth before I figured out what I'm trying to ask. And I'll be like, so what you're saying is maybe like, was it kind of, and then I'll finally answer the question. So the first thing is I want to make me look good. So
Right.
I will cut out the whole hemming and hawing, and then I listen to their answer. And the first thing I ask is, did they answer the question? Because sometimes I might go, hey, so what's your favorite pizza? And they go, purple. Like, okay, you gave me an answer, but you didn't answer the question. And if that's the case, that goes on the editing floor. And then in some cases, I remember once I interviewed somebody and they just dropped an absolute gold mine about the 25-minute mark. And I went, I don't want my audience to wait 25 minutes to get that. So I just took the question and put it up front. Now, I'm not making them say things they didn't say. I just was like, this question and answer stands by itself. Let's move it to the front. And that's the other thing I see people do is they don't get to the good stuff. Every
Right.
time, every year, I kind of do a survey, and people go, I say like, what are your pet peeves? And that's like always in the top 5 of get to the good stuff. It's like when you tune into the news, they don't go, our top story tonight, we're all going to die. But first, look at this water skiing squirrel. It's like, that doesn't work. So get to what people tuned in on. If the episode said how to lose 20 pounds in 2 months, and then you start off, hey, wait till you hear what Mr. Whiskers did. That cat is so just, like, no, they didn't tune in to hear about Mr. Whiskers. Now, if you want to share that, that's fine. Put it at the end of the show where all your super fans are still listening, but get to the good stuff.
I love that. I got to ask one other thing though, because
Yeah.
I think this is important. Is there like podcast etiquette that we don't know about? Because I was just thinking when you were talking about like cutting out some of the times where maybe it was a little bit of a lull in the interview or they didn't answer it quite correctly. You're saying, like, I'm trying to make my podcast look good, so I'm going to extract that. But have you ever had guests that you interviewed and you went, I don't even know if I want to put this episode out there? And is there
Yes.
etiquette around that?
Well, there's good etiquette and there's bad etiquette.
Okay.
Bad etiquette is where you wimp out and you go, I don't know what happened, but the software ate it. My dog ate my
Whoops.
homework is now, I
Yeah.
don't know. I did. So there's that. And I had this about 3 months ago. I had a guy, we'd done a pre-interview and I was like, okay, this will work. But when he came on, he was kind of telling me how to interview him and he really wanted to tell his story. And I'm like, my audience wants takeaways. Like, let's do the takeaways up front, give them something to chew on. And then I can go, how did you even get into this business? And then we can jump into the story. And he wasn't having any of that. And again, I could have rearranged stuff, but in the end, I didn't have any takeaways. And so I said, can we get on Zoom? And I kind of explained to him, I said, yeah, I listened to it. Number one, he also didn't bring his good microphone. And I said, I want you to sound phenomenal. I loved our pre-interview, but somehow we got off topic and we just didn't really do that. And that's when I found out why he really wanted me to interview him is he wanted to pitch me hard to become one of his clients. I don't think he even cared that we interviewed each other. And I just said, well, I said, I need to go back. I said, but I'm pretty sure I'm not going to release that in its current format. And he was fine. And then he explained how I could triple my income simply by tripling my prices. And I was like, wow, that's worth, $10,000 a month for you as a coach. I'm like, I don't think so. But that was interesting. So I always say you are the goalie of your show and your audience is behind you. So when somebody comes in and they have, they're using a Blue Yeti that's, 15 feet from their mouth and it sounds like they're in a fishbowl in a bathroom, it's your brand that takes the hit. And so when you come in, I just, nope, not on my show. Sorry. Nope, nope, nope. I don't listen to really, really popular shows where the audio is horrible. And I'm not so much of an audio snob until I started driving around. Usually I'm in my office when I'm listening to stuff. And when you add the sound of a freeway and everything else, if your volumes are all over the place or somebody has a lot of built-in echo, you can't hear them. And whose brand takes the hit? Yours. And people go, well, I get it, Dave, but they're my guest. I go, well, your guest came into your living room and took a bunch of poo-poo right there right on the carpet. They went poo-poo. I'm like, what if somebody did that? You would go, yeah, I'm sorry. You need to leave now. So, well, one of the things I do is I had someone this week. They said, I said, you look like a good guest for my show. And we were going to do a kind of a pre-interview. And I said, hey, I don't think we need a pre-interview. You really seem like a great fit. I said, but I just want to let you know, I do have one disclaimer, and that is because I don't know you. I said, I reserve the right to not publish this if I don't think it brings value. And I said, are you okay with that? And she said, oh, absolutely. And we had a phenomenal discussion. She didn't have to worry about it. But that kind of, I've had two people I've said that to, and you're like, well, what do you mean? Like, if you're not going to publish it, I'm like, no, I'm just saying if you don't like have content that resonates with my audience, I reserve the right to not publish it. And they kind of like, how dare you? And
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, well, if you don't have confidence in your material, then it's right there. There's only, I don't know, 4 other billion people I can interview on this subject. So, I make sure that what gets to my audience is going to make them laugh, cry, think, groan, educate, or entertain. Hopefully more than one of those. But if I'm not doing any of those, you're boring.
Well, Dave, I think that we might take your poo poo analogy and just put that as the front clip of this podcast interview because I think we might be able to achieve all those things you just listed.
Well,
There you go.
before this coach gets a hold of Dave, we got to run to schoolofpodcasting.com. He has a membership that you can join before he raises. He could triple the price.
He could do it
So
without the coach, too.
so before
Yeah.
he triples the price, go to schoolofpodcasting.com. If this stuff interests you, if you'd like some more hand holding, have Dave hold your hand every step of the way. Get your podcast out there. I have a couple more things that's absolutely fascinating as we're wrapping up. Next one you mentioned earlier, but I think super important. Some people do desire to monetize the podcast. So investing time and energy into this, what are some avenues that somebody might have in order to turn this from a hobby and just something that they want to do to the monetization side of podcasting?
Yeah. So the number one way is not ads. It's doing what I'm doing. I have a membership site. So selling your own products or service, like not a contest over everything else, the best.
Mm.
So there's
Yeah.
that. And then selling other people's stuff. So I have multiple streams of income and I recommend everybody do this. So I sell, I don't like, I'm not going to retire on my affiliate income, but I have, hundreds of dollars a month coming in from people buying microphones and all sorts of other stuff. So selling other people's stuff. Then you get into crowdfunding. There are people that are making, 5 and 6 figures a month with crowdfunding. So this is the Patreon, the Supercast, the Glow.fm. And again, if you've got a super engaged audience, that can work. Then we get into ads. So then there's host read ads, which are somewhere around $25 per 1,000 downloads. And then eventually you get into programmatic ads, which I'm not a fan of. Those are around $3 to $5 per 1,000 downloads. And then there's also things like free stuff. I got a book yesterday, and I got headphones yesterday. Someone just sent them to me. You get free stuff. And then, like I said, one of the things that really I think is the most valuable thing are the relationships that you build and the opportunities that come up. But those are the ways. And if you need those, can I bust into my pukey radio voice?
Yeah,
Do
of
it.
course.
Just check out the book, Profit from Your Podcast: Proven Strategies to Turn Listeners into a Livelihood. Available at profitfromyourpodcast.com.
Profit,
That's awesome.
profitfromyourpodcast.com, and also schoolofpodcasting.com is how you can get plugged in and connected in. I'm going to get your opinion, and then I'm going to let you go, Dave. I'm a big advocate. So one of the things, so you mentioned downloads.
Mm.
And I think that sometimes people get super hung up on downloads. Now, this is not to say sometimes people are like, well, that's because you guys don't have any downloads. I'm not saying that I track all of our downloads. James probably, that's more in his wheelhouse. I see that sometimes in some cases, like vanity metrics like followers and likes,
Oh,
etc.
sure.
But I do recognize that it is important. But all that to say that I think that one of the things, I have two theories I want to get your opinion on. Number one of the areas that I see is incredibly underserved is local podcasts. Everybody just thinks like, well, podcast needs to be for the worldwide
Right.
internet,
For
right? Like for
everybody.
every world wide web. I'm putting it everywhere. And I'm like, yeah, but you know how easy it would be to win if I had an
Dominate
Akron,
your
if I had an
community.
Akron podcast. The podcast was dedicated to Akron small businesses, sports, local sports. It was very local. I could easily get people to come on. I probably wouldn't be that hard eventually for me to get the mayor on my podcast. And when we talk about like influence and building this brand, I think that local podcasts are incredibly underserved currently. Any thoughts or tips on how we could better serve our local communities?
Absolutely. It's funny you say that because I've started it and stopped it about 4 times. An Akron podcast. I'm from Akron, Ohio. And my problem is it turns out I'm not that passionate about Akron, Ohio. I love my hometown, but it just I have a bunch of podcasts and I didn't have enough time. But yeah, I've talked to people who do local podcasts because it's just an underserved market. They used to have a newspaper that everybody used to read, and now the newspaper is kind of a pamphlet. And so when you can secure yourself in the community and get to know everybody, absolutely. And then, like, if you come to Akron, let me know. I will buy you a Luigi's pizza. And so that's like
I thought it
it's
was
a staple.
Swenson's. I thought it was Swenson's.
Oh, Swenson's would be good too.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so that would be good. And those are the things that people, when you come to town, like that's where you want to go. And so that would be I think it would be like shooting fish in a barrel to get them to
Yeah.
sponsor a show. And I've talked to other people who have hyper local shows and they say, yeah. And then you do things when you do an interview, go to Sticker Mule or whoever you use, get some stickers made, clear ones that you can put on like their front door on a window. It says, as heard on the blah, blah, blah podcast. So you're
Smart.
leaving and get little business cards. Can I put these on the cash register so people can click and they can scan a QR code? There's all sorts of ways. You're promoting them, help them promote you. But yeah, it's just one of those things. If I do like between 4 and 5 podcasts already, and I tried the Akron one, I'd go, I just don't have enough time to do it right. Because I was trying to do things that weren't negative. I wanted to spotlight businesses And Akron has had a lot of turmoil over the last couple of years. And I was just like, there isn't a ton of positive things going on in Akron. And I was like, I don't have that, like I said, to do it right. But if you're thinking about it, absolutely do it. And then you have to set your expectations, because when you've only got X amount of downloads, well, remember, you're going hyper niche. And
Yes.
it all goes back to, why am I doing this? Downloads are great. In January, my downloads go through the roof because everybody goes, I'm dropping 40 pounds and I'm starting a podcast. And so my numbers go through the roof. In February, much like gym memberships, they go down. But my membership goes up. Well, I don't base my success on downloads. I base my success on how many new members I get.
Mhm.
So I use downloads to kind of measure, was this popular or not? I love to go into Apple. Apple has a back end and you can see how far people listened. That can be kind of a lovely little smack to you if you're like, oh, everybody loves my show. And you go, wait, they're only making it 40% through the show. That's probably a reason why your show isn't growing. So I love that metric to see where people are. And yeah, but local shows, absolutely hop on board. Come on in. The water's warm.
Gold in that answer, a lot of gold. That one needs to be moved to the front, James.
Yeah.
Last
No,
thing for
the
you.
poo analogy is winning.
All right, last question. My thesis on this is another reason why podcasting is something that people should entertain, is that podcasting networks are
Yeah.
not, they've not really taken hold. I mean, they exist, but they're not big. It's not like, the concept is a
It's
little
not
bit like
networks everywhere. Yeah.
NBC, CBS, and then there's a roster of shows, right, that are on this network. And you and I have a particular interest in this movement. And the reason why, Dave, is I think that it's not long, and you even coupling all of the topics that you've talked about, podcasts with a membership site. I always wonder how long it is before Netflix, Paramount Plus, Disney subscription models that already exist, before they decide they need podcasts.
Yeah.
Right. And I think the easiest way for them to acquire it, because I think that Netflix figures out it's cheaper for me to acquire a podcast network and develop and produce these shows than it is to produce these TV shows. A lot of money goes into that. And if I can get the same amount of listeners, subscribers, and bring people to my platform, it will be just as profitable for them. And so I think there's a little bit of a race to understand podcast networks, and be a part of that before big money starts showing up and starts gobbling up. We saw Spotify jump in, but they were buying shows, right? But now I think we're going to see, like, hey, if you have a strong network, this could be purchased the entire network and moved on to something like Netflix, who's not in the podcasting game to my knowledge yet. But I think it's a matter of time. What do you think, Dave?
Yeah, this is actually, if you've ever heard of Luminary, and kind of their first step into it was really, for lack of a better, they were really cocky. Like, look at us, we're Luminary. We've paid a bunch of people. Look at all the celebrities that are on our thing, and you don't need ads. And it's only $8 a month. And we're like, yeah, but I haven't heard of any of this yet. And so you had to pay to just come into the garden. And then people heard it and they're like, that's all right, but is it worth $8? And so, Spotify, you'd mentioned, Spotify has tried exclusives, right? And almost all of them have now not exclusive anymore, because people get really, like, for the longest time, I love the app Overcast. And I always said, you will pry Overcast from my cold dead hands, until another app came along that had one other feature. But like Spotify's, the actual experience on Spotify of listening to shows is not great. It's not awful. It's not great. So that's part of it. And networks like HBO has jumped in. They have, listen to the official podcast. It's at the very end of most of their shows. Netflix has dabbled a little bit with it. It makes sense, because what you're doing is you're building that community around that show that want to talk about, oh, did you see last week's episode? But the thing that I always let people know, and yes, to hold up another book, this one's not mine. Eric Newsom has a great book called Make Noise. Eric worked at NPR, and he's just a wealth of knowledge. But he says networks don't make small shows big. They make big shows bigger. And that's typically the case. It's like when you get a manager, for, if you're in the entertainment business, you have to have something to manage to get a manager. And so many people are like, okay, I just started on episode 10. Now I want to join a network. And, unless I know a guy that does a show all about kind of retro sports. Like it's not football, it's past football. And they're all about like, for like old players, for lack of a better phrase, which are great because those guys are dying for exposure because nobody's paying attention to it's an underserved market. That guy has a whole network. Glenn Hebert has the Horse Radio Network. He's 17 shows. They're all about different breeds of horses, but he's able to combine them all because all those horses eat food. And so whatever, I don't know if there's a horse chow or what, but it's easy to get those kind of things as sponsors when you've got 17 shows that all share a common thing. So there's definitely pros and cons, but I'll be interested to see. I know Amazon has had Lore and I forget something about Homecoming. There have been podcasts that are kind of piloted as a podcast, and they're like, let's see if we can grow an audience with this. Hey, this really resonated. Now let's turn it into a TV show. So I've seen a couple TV shows that have started as podcasts. So it'll be fun to watch.
Yeah.
Well, you're a wealth of knowledge. Man, thank you so much for your time. I want to encourage everybody to check out Dave Jackson's School of Podcasting. Join his group. I mean, it's very reasonable. And I think, for some people too, that's the thing that you need is you need some accountability.
Yes.
You need to put a little skin in the game.
You need to get into a community that holds you accountable.
Get into a community that will hold you accountable, as he was talking about earlier. And I just love this because I think that our audience can benefit so much by diving in. So I hope that you guys will take it to heart, and I hope that you won't just put that on your list of, yeah, that sounds cool. Like, do something. And like he said, we're recording this in October. I'm not sure when it will drop, but put that on your New Year's resolution.
Yeah.
Lose 40 pounds. Start your podcast. Join School of Podcasting.
And keep a podcast going.
Don't poop on the living room floor.
Yes.
That's what I took away today. Dave, thank you so much for joining us here on the None of Your Business podcast.
Oh, guys, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. I don't know how we top this one, but you know how it goes. We'll be back again next week, and we'll give it the try. Maybe we won't poop on the floor next week. You never know. We'll see what happens. We'll see who's here to entertain us next week. Thank you for listening.